Have you ever seen someone walk into a situation thinking they had everything under control, only to be completely blindsided? That's exactly what happened when a well-known socialist journalist thought he could humiliate Melania Trump on live television. He came prepared, armed with condescending remarks and loaded questions, expecting to make her look weak, uninformed, or out of place. What he didn't expect was Donald Trump watching. For years, the media had underestimated Melania. They mocked her accent, dismissed her intelligence, and ignored her accomplishments. But while some first ladies might have backed down under pressure, Melania was different. And more importantly, Donald Trump was not the kind of man to sit quietly while someone disrespected his wife. The moment the journalist crossed the line, Trump's response was immediate, sharp, and devastating. It wasn't just a defense, it was a complete verbal takedown that left the journalist scrambling for words. The audience, expecting a typical interview, was left in stunned silence, and within minutes, the internet exploded. The clip went viral, racking up millions of views, sparking fierce debates, and proving once again why Trump remains one of the most dominant figures in modern media. What exactly did he say? And how did a journalist who thought he had control of the moment end up completely overpowered? Stay with us, because this is one of the most talked about media confrontations of the year. If you believe in leadership, power, and second chances, this is the place for you. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to never miss an inspiring Trump story. He had built his career on confrontation. Every interview, every debate, every broadcast was another opportunity to push an agenda, to create a spectacle, to catch his subjects off guard and force them into defensive positions. He thrived on controversy, on crafting narratives that made headlines, on using the power of the media to manipulate perception. To many, he was seen as a fearless journalist, unafraid to challenge those in power. But to those who had been on the receiving end of his tactics, he was something else entirely. A political operative, disguised as a reporter. A man who didn't just ask questions, but set traps. For years, he had made it his mission to go after conservatives, particularly those associated with the Trump administration. His interviews were never about uncovering the truth. They were about framing the conversation in a way that made his targets appear weak, uninformed, or even dishonest. He carefully chose his words, crafting loaded questions that had no good answer. If a politician hesitated for even a second, the pause would be clipped, edited, and replayed endlessly as proof of their supposed incompetence. If they pushed back too hard, he would feign outrage, turning himself into the victim and painting his opponent as aggressive or unreasonable. It was a game he had mastered. He had made senators stumble, governors squirm, and even career diplomats break under pressure. He knew how to control the conversation, how to steer it exactly where he wanted it to go. He relied on emotional manipulation, using his platform to frame himself as the noble defender of truth, while casting his opponents as corrupt, out of touch, or simply unworthy of serious discussion. And now, he had his sights set on Melania Trump. To him, it was an easy target. He had watched as other media figures mocked her accent, dismissed her as nothing more than a former model, and questioned her intelligence. He had seen the headlines that ridiculed her, the articles that pretended she had no real influence, the commentators who sneered at the idea that she had anything of value to say. He believed that she was unprepared, that she would be caught off guard, that she would hesitate under his relentless questioning. And once she faltered, once she gave even the slightest indication of discomfort, he would pounce. His strategy was simple. He would set the tone immediately, using a condescending remark to establish dominance. He would interrupt her responses, reframing her words in a way that made her seem unsure or uninformed. If she attempted to correct him, he would laugh it off, subtly reinforcing the idea that she wasn't to be taken seriously. This was what he had done to countless politicians before her. and in nearly every case it had worked. They had struggled to recover, stumbled over their words, or become visibly frustrated, all of which played directly into his hands. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that this time would be different, because this time Donald Trump was watching. And before the interview was over, the journalist who had spent years controlling the narrative would find himself completely outmatched, completely exposed, and completely dismantled in a way that no one had ever seen before. From the moment Melania Trump stepped into the public eye as First Lady, she became a target. Unlike those who had come before her, she was not a career politician, nor did she fit the mold of what the media expected from a First Lady. She was elegant, reserved, and undeniably poised. Yet from the beginning, she faced an onslaught of criticism that few others had endured. The press did not celebrate her grace. They did not highlight her intelligence. Instead, they sought to diminish her, to make her seem unworthy of the position she held, as if she had simply appeared there by accident rather than by merit. They attacked her accent, mocking the way she spoke, as if fluency in 5 languages somehow made her less capable. They dismissed her accomplishments, pretending that her years of experience in business and philanthropy meant nothing. When she spoke about the issues she cared about, they downplayed her words, twisting them to fit their own narratives. Even her fashion choices were scrutinized with a level of intensity that revealed a deeper bias. While other First Ladies had been praised for their style, Melania was accused of making statements she had never intended. It was a strategy that had worked on countless figures before her. In the world of media, perception was everything, and they had spent years crafting an image of Melania that fit their agenda. They painted her as silent, as uninformed, as someone simply standing in the shadow of her husband. The more she refused to play their game, the more aggressively they pushed. And that was exactly why the journalist chose her. To him, she was the perfect target. She was not known for fiery exchanges or aggressive pushback. She was measured, controlled, and, in his mind, defenseless against the kind of verbal ambush he had perfected. He believed she would hesitate, that she would struggle to respond when faced with rapid-fire questioning, that she would be unable to counter the narrative he had already prepared. He had seen the way others in the media treated her, and he assumed the same tactics would work again. He would catch her off guard, frame her words in a way that made her appear unsure, and then capitalize on any moment of uncertainty. If she fumbled even slightly, he would seize on it, replaying it endlessly to reinforce the image he wanted the public to see. But what he failed to realize, what he could not have anticipated, was that Melania Trump was not the fragile figure he imagined her to be. She had spent years enduring the relentless attacks of a press that had never given her a fair chance. She had learned how to carry herself through the storm, how to move with unwavering composure even as they attempted to tear her down. She had never asked for sympathy, never sought validation from those who had already decided they would never give it to her. And most importantly, what the journalist failed to understand was that she was not standing alone. Because while he had prepared to take on Melania Trump, he had not prepared for what would happen when Donald Trump decided he had seen enough. He had walked into this moment believing he controlled the narrative, believing that this interview would end like so many others before it, with the subject weakened, embarrassed, left struggling to recover. What he did not realize was that, in just a matter of moments, it would be his own career, his own credibility, and his own reputation that would be left in ruins. He had been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it in his mind long before the camera started rolling. The journalist had spent years crafting his technique, refining his ability to push just far enough to make his targets uncomfortable without appearing outright hostile. It was an art, one that required precision, subtlety, and just the right amount of arrogance. He had done this before. He had seen the hesitation in the eyes of politicians, the flickers of doubt that signaled he had landed a blow. He expected nothing different today. From the moment Melania sat down, he had been testing the waters, laying the groundwork for what was to come. He had opened with polite formalities, but beneath them was something else, an undertone of condescension, a carefully measured performance meant to disarm her before he struck. He spoke to her not as an equal, not as a respected public figure, but as if she were out of place, an outsider who did not belong in the role she held. Then he made his move. His words were deliberate, spoken with the ease of a man who believed himself untouchable. He made a comment about her accent, the way she spoke, weaving it into a question that pretended to be innocent, but was anything but. It was not a genuine inquiry, not an attempt to understand. It was a calculated insult, designed to suggest that she was less capable, that her voice was one that did not belong in serious discussions. He watched her closely, searching for the reaction he wanted, a flicker of discomfort, moment of hesitation, anything that would give him the opening he needed to press further. But when that didn't happen, he pushed harder. He shifted the conversation, questioning her intelligence under the guise of asking about policy. His words dripped with skepticism, with the suggestion that she was nothing more than a decorative figure, someone whose presence in the political sphere was unearned. And then he went even further. With a smirk, he made a remark about her role as First Lady, subtle enough to maintain deniability, but pointed enough that there was no mistaking his intent. He implied that she was merely an accessory, a woman who had been handed a position rather than one who had earned it. It was not the first time someone in the media had tried to diminish her, and he was confident it would work now, just as it had before. He expected her to falter, to stumble over her response, to give him something, anything that he could seize upon and amplify. He expected, at the very least, to see the doubt in her eyes, the frustration of someone who knew she was being baited but could do nothing to stop it. But what he did not realize, what had not occurred to him in all his careful planning, was that Donald Trump was watching. Trump had been silent up until that moment, but he had seen everything. He had recognized the strategy the journalist was using, had heard the edge in his voice, had understood the game being played. And in that instant, the game changed. Because while the journalist had spent his career tearing others down, Trump had spent his life fighting back. And now, for the first time, the man who had always been in control of the narrative was about to experience what it felt like to have the ground shift beneath him. What happened next would not just be a response, it would be a reckoning. Donald Trump's journey is filled with resilience, bold decisions, and unforgettable moments. Stay inspired, like this video, drop a comment below, and subscribe to be part of this movement. Donald Trump had spent a lifetime recognizing when a fight was coming. He had built his career, his empire, and his legacy on the ability to see an attack before it landed, to read the room before the first move was made. He was not a man who hesitated, not a man who waited to see how things would unfold. He struck first, with precision, with force, with an understanding that in the world of power and influence, dominance belonged to those who seized it. So, the moment he heard the journalist's words, the moment he caught the smug tilt of his head, the calculated arrogance behind the insult, something in Trump shifted. It was not anger. Anger was reactive, unfocused. This was something sharper, something colder, a decision. He stepped in without hesitation, without giving the journalist even a second to settle into his false confidence. His tone was measured, deliberate, the kind of calm that sent a chill through the air because it carried a weight that could not be ignored. There was no wasted movement, no unnecessary words. Every syllable that left his mouth was calculated to land with maximum impact. He did not just defend Melania. That would have been too simple, too predictable. Instead, he turned the tables. He exposed the journalist's hypocrisy with the precision of a man who had spent decades dismantling his opponents. He pointed out the double standard, how the media that claimed to fight for equality had no problem tearing down woman who had done nothing but carry herself with grace and dignity. He asked why certain first ladies were revered no matter what they did, while Melania, despite her accomplishments, was constantly scrutinized. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The sheer force of his words, the undeniable logic behind them, was enough to put the journalist on the defensive before he had a chance to respond. And then he delivered the blow that no one expected. With a single statement, he took control of the entire conversation, leaving the journalist scrambling for footing. The very same man who had spent his career putting others in uncomfortable positions, forcing them to react, was now the one struggling for words. The audience, the crew, even the journalist himself, everyone in the room felt the shift. The balance of power had changed because Trump had done what he always did. He had taken an attack and turned it into an opportunity. He had recognized the game and rewritten the rules in real time. And in that moment, the journalist, who had spent his career controlling the narrative, realized that he had walked into a battle he could not win. Donald Trump had always understood the power of words. He had seen how they could build legacies, destroy reputations, and shift public perception in an instant. He knew that the right words, delivered with precision, could dismantle even the most carefully constructed attacks. And as he stood before the journalist who had just attempted to humiliate Melania, he was about to prove exactly why he remained one of the most dominant figures in modern media and politics. He didn't blink. He didn't waver. He looked directly at the journalist, his posture unwavering, his expression unreadable. And then, with the kind of certainty that only comes from years of mastering the art of confrontation, he spoke. "You would never speak this way about another First Lady. You wouldn't dare," Trump said, his voice cutting through the air, with absolute authority. "You wouldn't ask these questions if she had a different last name, if she belonged to a different political party. And you know it." The journalist flinched, just slightly, but enough for anyone paying attention to notice. He had spent years tearing down his targets with carefully disguised condescension, with a tone that allowed him to feign neutrality even as he pushed a clear agenda. But now, he was the one being exposed. Trump didn't stop. He leaned in, pressing forward with the force of a man who had been waiting for this moment. Melania Trump speaks 5 languages. She is one of the most accomplished, elegant, and intelligent first ladies this country has ever had. She has represented the United States on the world stage with dignity and class. And yet you, someone who claims to respect women, have done nothing but mock her. The journalist opened his mouth as if to interject, but Trump wasn't finished. "You and people like you," Trump continued, his tone growing sharper, "pretend to stand for equality, for fairness, for respect, but what you really stand for is control. You pick and choose who deserves respect based on your political agenda. You celebrate women who say what you want to hear, and you attack those who don't fit into your narrative." A ripple went through the room. The journalist's usual air of smug confidence was gone, replaced with something else, something dangerously close to panic. Trump wasn't just responding to an attack. He was exposing the machine behind it. He turned his attention to the broader issue, to the media itself, making it clear that this wasn't just about Melania. It was about all conservatives, about how they were treated, about how their wives, their families, their accomplishments were routinely dismissed, ignored, or ridiculed while others were praised for doing far less. "You've spent years pretending that you're fair," Trump said. "You're not. If Melania were a Democrat, you'd be calling her one of the most accomplished first ladies in history. You'd be writing glowing profiles about her grace and her intelligence. But instead, you attack her because you think you can get away with it." The silence in the room was deafening. The journalist, who had begun this exchange believing he would control the narrative, now found himself completely on the defensive. Every move he had planned, every strategy he had once used so successfully, had been turned against him in an instant. Because Donald Trump had done what he did best. He hadn't just responded. He had destroyed the attack at its foundation, exposed the bias behind it, and left no room for debate. And in that moment, everyone watching, whether they supported him or not, understood why Trump was a force that could never be ignored. For the first time in his career, the journalist was speechless. The man who had built an empire on controlling narratives, on twisting words to suit his agenda, on forcing his interviewees into defensive positions, now found himself in the very situation he had always avoided. The confidence that once fueled his every word was gone, replaced by something unrecognizable: uncertainty. The weight of what had just happened settled over the studio like a thick fog. The air was heavy, charged with an intensity that no one had anticipated. For years, the journalist had been the one delivering the knockout blows, the one who dictated the direction of every conversation. But now, in front of millions, he had been dismantled. The room remained frozen for a long moment, as if no one was quite sure how to react. Then came the first gasp, a sharp intake of breath from someone in the audience who had just realized the full gravity of what they had witnessed. It was followed by a murmur, a ripple of quiet voices struggling to comprehend what had unfolded before their eyes. And then, without warning, it happened. Applause. It started with a few hesitant claps, unsure, almost cautious, as if the people responsible for them couldn't believe what they were doing. But then others joined in. The sound grew, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't forced or routine. It was the kind of reaction that came from something truly undeniable. Because whether they supported Trump or not, whether they had walked into that studio expecting to cheer or to criticize, they all recognized one thing: something real had just happened. The journalist, still struggling to regain his composure, shifted in his chair, his fingers tightening slightly, as if grasping for control. He had faced difficult interviews before, had weathered heated debates, but this was different. This wasn't just a verbal exchange, it was a public reckoning. Trump had done more than defend Melania. He had exposed the journalist's bias, turned his tactics against him, and left no room for escape. He hadn't just countered an attack, he had flipped the entire interview on its head, making it clear that the old rules no longer applied. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of the moment that would soon flood the internet, replayed, dissected, and celebrated by millions. And as the applause continued, as the journalists sat in stunned silence, as the world realized that they had just witnessed one of the most brutal media takedowns in history, Trump leaned back, his expression unreadable. He didn't need to say anything else. The damage was already done, and the journalist who had once believed he controlled the power of the press now understood that there were some people you simply could not outmaneuver. The moment the interview ended, the real battle began. The cameras may have stopped rolling inside the studio, but outside, across the digital landscape, a storm was brewing. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. It wasn't just another political exchange, not just another tense interview. This was something different. It was a moment that had exposed the media machine, that had revealed the double standards so many had suspected but never seen so clearly. And now, the entire world was watching. At first, it spread quietly, an uploaded clip here, a shared post there. But soon, it became unavoidable. The hashtags trended within an hour. Trump defends Melania, journalist exposed, media bias revealed. They flooded every platform. Millions of people had seen media hit jobs before, had witnessed journalists try to corner and humiliate their targets, but rarely, if ever, had they seen someone fight back this effectively. And it wasn't just Trump's supporters who were talking. Even those who had spent years opposing him, who had criticized him at every turn, found themselves unable to deny what had just happened. The facts were there. The journalist had set a trap, but it had backfired spectacularly. Social media became a battlefield. comment sections exploded with debates, some desperately trying to spin the moment in favor of the journalist, others ruthlessly calling him out for his blatant attempt at a hit piece. Side-by-side comparisons flooded in, clips of past First Ladies being treated with respect, contrasted with the endless attacks on Melania. People pointed out how, despite years of media hostility, she had carried herself with grace, never resorting to the theatrics or personal attacks that had become so common in modern politics. Meanwhile, Trump's supporters were electrified. This was the moment they had been waiting for, proof, undeniable and unfiltered, that their instincts had been right all along. The media had spent years crafting narratives, twisting truths, and pushing an agenda. And in a single interview, Trump had torn it apart in real time. And then there was the backlash. The journalist, who had once been celebrated for his aggressive interviews, found himself in a position he had never experienced, on the defensive. His usual allies were silent. The networks that once praised his tough questioning were nowhere to be found. Instead, thousands of furious comments flooded his social media pages. "How do you call yourself a journalist? This wasn't an interview. It was an ambush. Would you have dared to do this to a Democrat's wife? Melania has more class than you ever will." The damage wasn't just public, it was professional. Media insiders whispered about how he had overplayed his hand. His credibility, so carefully cultivated over the years, had been shattered. In seconds. Meanwhile, the legacy of the moment only grew. The clip was analyzed, broken down in reaction videos, discussed on news panels across the country. Some called it a masterclass in debate, others a wake-up call for the media. But no matter where people stood, one thing was clear: this was a turning point. Trump had done what so few could. He had flipped the script, destroyed the narrative, and left an entire industry scrambling to recover. And the world had seen it all. Every great leader leaves a legacy. Be part of the conversation. Smash that like button, share your opinion in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for more powerful Trump insights. The fallout was immediate. The moment had played out live, unfiltered, beyond the control of the carefully managed narratives that usually dictated political discourse. There was no way to rewrite what had just happened. No way to edit out Trump's words, no way to soften the reality of the journalist's complete and total defeat. But that didn't mean they wouldn't try. The mainstream media, the same institutions that had spent years portraying Trump as reckless, unprepared, and incapable of serious discussion, were now faced with a crisis of their own making. Their trusted journalist, their attack dog, the man who had made a career out of putting conservatives on the ropes, had been publicly dismantled. His strategy had backfired, his arrogance had led to his downfall, and now the entire world had seen it unfold. In real time, the response was predictable. First came the deflection. Within hours, certain networks and media personalities began avoiding direct coverage of the moment. They focused instead on minor details, attempting to shift the conversation away from Trump's defense of Melania and onto unrelated controversies. They refused to replay the exchange in its entirety, instead selectively cutting and pasting portions of the interview to create a different narrative. Then came the damage control. Op-eds and think pieces flooded news sites, attempting to rationalize the journalist's failure. Some claimed that he had been ambushed by Trump, as if asking loaded, disrespectful questions wasn't his usual tactic. Others painted Trump's response as an aggressive overreaction, ignoring the fact that the journalist had been the one to escalate first. But despite their best efforts, the truth had already reached the public. The clips circulating online weren't edited by media producers. They were raw, uncut, and brutally honest. Millions of people had already seen Trump's words, had watched the journalist's confidence shatter in real time. The media could try to downplay it, but they could not erase it. And for the journalist himself, the backlash was inescapable. He had spent years crafting an image of himself as a fearless interviewer, a man who could handle anyone, no matter how powerful. But now, that image had been shattered. His credibility, once unquestioned among his peers, was now under fire. Rival journalists, sensing weakness, began subtly distancing themselves from him. Some even suggested that he had miscalculated, gone too far, exposed himself as biased beyond repair. In private conversations, producers wondered if his ability to command authority in interviews had been permanently damaged. His own network struggled with how to handle it. To ignore the incident entirely would make them seem out of touch, but to acknowledge it fully meant admitting that Trump had won decisively. And so, caught between these two realities, the media found itself flailing. For years, they had controlled the flow of information, had dictated the angles, had chosen which stories were amplified and which were buried. But in that moment, they had been outmaneuvered by a man they had spent years trying to discredit. Trump had done what so many had failed to do. He had broken through the illusion. No matter how they spun it, the damage was done. And the journalist, once so confident in his ability to shape narratives, now found himself the subject of one he could not escape. Donald Trump had always been a fighter. It was in his nature, in his blood, in every battle he had faced throughout his career, whether in business, politics, or the relentless war waged by the media. But this time, it wasn't about defending himself. It wasn't about responding to an attack on his policies or his character. This time, it was about Melania. And when it came to defending the people he loved, there was no force on earth that could make him back down. From the moment the journalist had crossed the line, Trump had known exactly what he needed to do. He had seen this game play out too many times before. The condescending tone, the veiled insults disguised as questions, the smug expectation that his target would stumble. But what the journalist had failed to realize was that Trump was not the kind of man who let disrespect slide. The moment Trump stepped in, the game changed. He didn't just push back. He crushed the attack before it could take root. He didn't just defend Melania. He forced the world to recognize who she truly was. A woman of grace, strength, and dignity. A woman who had spent years handling relentless scrutiny with poise and resilience. A woman who, despite everything thrown her way, never lashed out, never complained, never let them see her break. And that was what they feared most. Because no matter how much they tried to diminish her, Melania never gave them what they wanted. She did not play the victim. She did not crumble under pressure. She did not lower herself to their level. She simply rose above it all. And now, as the world watched the brutal takedown unfold, they saw exactly why Trump and Melania were different. Trump had proven yet again that loyalty was not just a word to him. It was a principle. When someone stood by him, he stood by them, unapologetically, unshakably. He did not hesitate. He did not retreat. He defended his wife with the full force of his presence, making it clear that no amount of media spin, no amount of politically motivated attacks would ever change the truth. And that truth was undeniable. Melania Trump was more than they gave her credit for. She had endured more than most would ever know, and through it all, she had never once wavered. As the dust settled, as the journalist struggled to recover from a takedown he had never seen coming, one thing became clear. This was more than just a viral moment. This was a lesson in respect, a lesson in loyalty, a lesson in the power of standing up for what is right. Because true leadership is not measured by power alone. It is measured by the willingness to stand firm, even when the entire world is against you. Share this story so that more people can see what true leadership looks like. Strength, strategy, and vision. If these qualities inspire you, you're in the right place. Show your support by liking this video, commenting your thoughts and subscribing for more.